Thank you all for joining us for today's ALM series webcast, Scrum and Agile Management with Visual Studio, presented by Clementino de Mendoza. My name is Liz Tan, and I am the Market Response Representative for Neudesic and the moderator for today's webcast. This webcast is presented by Clementino de Mendoza, Neudesic's architectural consultants, and we are very excited to have him present for us this morning. Today's webcast is a part of our ALM series. We will be hosting the next webcast, Requirements and Storyboarding Visual Studio 2012, this Thursday, November 1st. We will be sending out more information about this webcast along with the webcast recording. If you're logged on, you should all be able to see the title slide that states Scrum and Agile Management with Visual Studio 2012. There was a brief intro earlier regarding features within live meeting. To briefly recap, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by typing them in. To ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. Please note that all questions will be held until the end. We will also be using the seating chart feature within live meeting. Changing your feedback color within this tool provides feedback to the presenter. To provide feedback, click on the feedback menu found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Select the feedback color. Your seat in the conference center will display your selected color. Lastly, this webcast is being recorded and will be available via the Neudesic website. We will email you when the link is available. If everyone is ready, please make sure your seat color is green. This time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Clementino.
Hi, everyone. As you guys have heard from the introduction, my name is Clementino Mendonca, and I've been an architect with Neudesic for the past few months. Before, I had worked with Microsoft and other consulting companies, always with ALM. Specifically when I worked with Microsoft, I was part of the National Services ALM team, and I had a nice chance of working as an NSF planner for Visual Studio. So some of the process template features that you had with Visual Studio 2010, I actually worked on a couple of them for NSF Agile and NSF CMI. I'm also a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org, so to me it's a pleasure to merge the two areas of my interest in ALM into this presentation. Let's get started, and at first let's do a quick review of what we think about Agile. Agile is an umbrella. So today's presentation is about Agile project management with Scrum and Agile. But I'm going to specifically be demoing features related to the process template that we have with Visual Studio 2012 pertaining to the Scrum template. But since Agile is an umbrella, you can see that anything that we do will be valuable to other process templates as well. As a recap, Agile has as its four main principles that individuals and their interactions are more important than primarily, tools and processes, and that also delivering software is the best measure for providing the current status of any project. We also value customer collaboration versus, contract negotiation, and that the objective is to learn and achieve the objective of software development as a working application to the customer. And finally, we, as a principle, we follow responding to change as opposed to blindly following a plan as a measure of being adaptive to any situations that might happen during the software development process. So, as I mentioned, since it's an umbrella, the techniques that we discuss here will be applicable to all Agile methods in the large. And based on my experience, I can tell you that CFS has been useful to manage any kind of projects based on an Agile method, even Waterfall ones. But talking on that, let's just refer a little bit about the difference between Waterfall and Agile and what's been happening in the last few years as we compare both. This report by the Standards Group with the Chaos Manifesto has been doing surveys on software development projects for quite a while, and the data that we have from 2002 to 2010 shows that if you slice it in terms of the project being Waterfall or Agile, that Agile has been much more successful and delivering projects according to expectations. So notice that although we still have issues with Agile software development, the challenge here means that they have achieved a few of the objectives, but not all of them. The success rate is much bigger as opposed to Waterfall, where in Waterfall you have most of the projects either failing or being challenged. That in itself speaks about volumes about the need to think about it, the adoption of using Agile. Agile's purpose is to minimize barriers to value delivery. So some of those barriers are isolation between teams, between users and stakeholders, isolated from developers and testers and operations in itself. That leads to, increased cycle times, of course, costs, satisfaction from the end users and stakeholders, and since Agile is about providing services to our customers, sometimes they will lose opportunities because the results that we provide by following typical Waterfall, they're not timely. The idea then is that with Agile, we should be able to provide some solutions to those value delivery impediments. Most of you might have seen this slide from several Microsoft presentations that have been going on, and they pretty much they show the issues that we have in day-to-day projects, be it Agile or Waterfall. From the beginning of the project, you have issues with the ideation piece, in that people do not understand the requirements very well. And then in the development piece, you will see that during the implementation, you'll have a lot of churn between requirements, priorities, no thinking about quality. There's no connection between you provide in terms of initial feedback for requirements to what would be the what we're creating later, and that leads to unmet customer and user expectations, because there was no focus on providing value, but rather just doing whatever you thought was the real what you thought was supposed to be delivered. Most of the times, that does not match what the customer expected, and that goes without saying that the operations themselves lead to another cycle. As you can see here on the right side, on the blue side, and that provides even more disconnection between what the customer wants and what we could provide. Now, normally in those Microsoft presentations, there would be a follow-up slide in that you would talk about the solutions from the tool perspective. But I decided for this presentation to adapt that slide and provide solutions from the Agile point of view, from the Agile methodologies point of view. So as you can see here, to those problems that we saw, the idea is that from the Agile perspective, we should capture user stories or requirements in some kind of a order list that we will call a backlog. From the development perspective, the idea is that the team will negotiate scope and priorities with customers so that they are able to balance between the needs of the developers in terms of catering to dependencies and software development internal issues versus the need for the customer in terms of getting value and getting to understand better what the business is about. And so on for everything else. We will have, if you're doing Agile properly, you will have a built-in quality cycle. Transparency will be norm, meaning that everyone will know exactly what you're doing, and that also implies traceability. And finally, the team starts to focus, instead of just gathering requirements and trying to figure out what they need to do. They will focus, now that they have everything cleaned up for them, to developing and delivering working software. And as you manage the criteria for defining that work is done from the customer perspective, you will then eliminate any issues related to the acceptance from the customer perspective. I won't go into the operation side because today's talk we don't have the time to talk about that and how that delves into DevOps, which is today an extension to Agile, so that you can create an entire feedback cycle back into development. But that's another talk that William Salazar, our ALM practice manager, will be providing, I think, a couple weeks from now. I'll let Amy and the others tell you guys when that's going to happen. But that will be the entire conversation that we'll have in a future presentation. That said, then let's focus in on the left side, on the definition and the development piece. And with that, we can move on into the Agile specifics. Now, as I said, we're going to be taking a look at the Scrum pillars as sort of a representation of what happens with all the Agile methodologies. And the idea is to see how can we enact. It's a kind of a technical term, which really just means to bring those concepts to reality, to make them work into reality with Visual Studio. You can do Agile software development with just using a board and paper and Post-its. But as teams grow and you start to have more and more distributed teams across the globe and across the country, tools such as TFS help us to enact those processes in a much better way. In fact, Gartner has recently, as July this year, and it's a report about the current state of the ALM, Application Lifecycle Management business, pretty much has put Microsoft at the forefront on the leaders that will allow that will provide tools to allow the teams to work unimpeded. That is, instead of the team kind of combining several tools from different sources and trying to come up with reports and then trying to manually create traceability matrices. Well, you have all that built into a tool, and then you just work, and then the tooling will provide those pieces of data to upper management and to the team itself as we go. As I said here, it takes learning on how to use the tools properly, and I don't expect that in just in 1 hour that you'll be able to do this. The idea is that you guys should be able to get into the documentation itself and be able to follow up with proper understanding later of what we need to do here. So as you can see here, there is an entire website that Microsoft has, and as an example here, this one is better. You have an application lifecycle management with Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server, and it goes through all activities that we have in a project: planning and tracking, and then storyboarding, engaging stakeholders. I will be referring to a few of those here in just a bit. And specifically this one, for instance, this is getting started as a team. I'll show you how this works, but it's going to be just a 10-minute demonstration. It's not enough for you guys to get an idea on how this works. So I recommend that after this talk that you will go to this Microsoft documentation websites and go through the tutorials that we have in there. So going back to our conversation here, let's talk a little bit about the Scrum pillars. Now, Scrum.org has published what we call a Scrum guide, and I'm taking the pillars directly from the guide. As you can see here, I have, in this case, the Scrum Team, right? And I'll be going back and forth in the guide just to show you guys what we have, if need be. But in any case, this guide is downloadable from scrum.org, and you can pretty much see that we're following the structure that we have in here. We'll talk about the events, the artifacts, and the definition of done as the collection of pillars that we have for this particular presentation. With that said, then let's take a look into the team from the Scrum perspective. Characteristics from the team are that teams are self-organizing, meaning that those teams, you don't have to tell anyone. Not even the Scrum Master tells the development team how to turn the product backlog into increments of potentially reusable or releasable functionality. The team self-organizes and decides on how that's going to be done. Also, that from a Scrum perspective, the development teams are cross-functional, meaning that each of the team members has skills that combined will make the team enabled to produce working product increment. Also, from a Scrum perspective, there are no titles in the team other than developers, meaning that you can have your own company functional titles as, business analyst, developer, project manager, but for the Scrum team, they're all developers. The other characteristic is that the teams do not contain subteams, meaning that it's usually a flat hierarchy of small teams with peer team members, meaning that that team of 5 to 6, 7, sometimes teams are bigger, up to 10. But if it becomes that much big, 15, 20, then it's usually the time to break the team into two and focus those two teams working in parallel on different feature sets. I won't go into how to scale up Scrum on this talk, but the main idea continues that teams do not contain subteams. Now let's demo a little bit how we can do teaming with Visual Studio, taking into account those features that I just mentioned. So if you think about how we think about teams as being self-organizing, that's pretty much, it means that you have a flat structure. As you can see here, and just one minute, I'm going to turn on one utility here to allow me to increase the size. So as you can see here on the left side, I have for team projects several features, security, group membership, source control, and etc. Now, when we talk about teams as being self-organizing, it means that we have teams of flat teams of team members that know what they want to do. When I look at group membership, as you can see here, I can edit my team members and add them to several levels. What I want to emphasize here right now is that, you see, I only have really contributors as the equivalent of what we call developers. What we have here is project administrators, mean actually people that have administrative access to the team project that can set permissions and etc. It doesn't mean that the person is administering the project. It's rather that the person is administering the physical project. And using Scrum parlance, we can call the readers politically correct way of referring to the chicken and the pigs versus chicken image that we have in Scrum. So pigs would be those that are committed to the project, that have their skin in the game, right? That if they don't do their things right, they're going to fail. So those are what we're calling contributors here generically into TFS. And the chicken would be those that are interested. They just want to be able to follow up on what's going on. They don't necessarily provide any input. And that's translated into TFS as readers. So much this is a very simple translation of those concepts, Scrum concepts into here. Also, as you can see here, we have each of those guys. I can have those guys here showing their particular capabilities. But for instance, Julia Iliana, she is a tester. Cameron, as far as I remember, is a developer. So is Brian Keller. And Harriman was classified, from what I can recall, a project administrator. But for the team, they're all developers. Even though they might have, as when we started this virtual machine, they have their different capabilities. Let me just check something here. We need to mute all the others. Yeah, I'll leave. Hey guys, can you mute yourselves? Okay. Now, the other thing that we think about teaming is that in teaming, I have to add users, and sometimes I have to even add subteams. Now, okay, it looks like I'm contradicting myself, right? I said that you can have, or you shouldn't have subteams for Scrum. The idea is that I'm going to have different teams for different slices of the application. Notice here that I have the Fabricam Fiber team and the Fabricam Web team, and I have some team members, right? And some of those team members overlap. Now, normally in Scrum, you wouldn't have that, but if you have a team project that has, let's say, 100 people working on it, you might have to create sub-teams, and then each of those teams would be, a team with an individual Scrum master and a particular product owner and so on. This is achieved by doing what we call areas, in that you can create areas within your application, and each of those areas can be set to work in parallel with one another. And that would be the way to emphasize that the team project can have sub-teams, but the Scrum team is usually a subunit within those. What else can I talk about here? There is also the capability of doing a lot of communication between the team members. You can set alerts so that the whole team is notified of a few events. Like, we can have events here if a build fails, if my build completes. TFS is a hub for communication. And as a hub for communication, it allows you to also, from within the UI, right, to see whether somebody is connected or not. And essentially then it becomes that place where if you want to talk about the project, you go. I will show a bit more features on how this communication occurs as we go back into the other parts of the demonstration. Right now, I want to go back into the slide deck and show you guys, talk a little bit about the next step in terms of enacting or enabling Scrum, which is going over the Scrum events. I took this picture directly from the documentation of Visual Studio 2012. As you can see here, we go through a product planning cycle that feeds a subset of those items which are being planned into the sprint, which is a period of time or a time box. Normally, Scrum defines it as being a month. Some teams define it as maybe being 2 weeks. It all depends on how you set it up. And then within that cycle, you have what we call a sprint, which other methods such as XP call iteration. Bottom line is that it doesn't matter the name, it's a time box. It has a very well-defined beginning and a very well-defined end. And then as we go through the development cycle, we will do on a daily basis what we call a daily Scrum, which is a 15-minute stand-up meeting, everybody standing up, and we go over on what we have done yesterday, what we're doing today, and everybody reports to the team also if they have any impediments. So the idea then is that in that 15-minute period, those 7 to 10 people will go very quickly about reporting to the team, what have I done, what will I do, and do I have any impediments? Those impediments will be followed up by the Scrum Master along with the team and resolved as soon as possible. So the events that we have mainly are described in here. Now there is also the release planning meetings, which are not part of that Scrum guide. I mean, it's mentioned, but it's not mentioned as in the outline, so I didn't add them here. I will talk about them very briefly. Now, before I talk about the Scrum events or do a demo about how to go about the Scrum events, I have to talk about a couple of artifacts. The documentation, as you guys saw in the Scrum guide, they talk about the events before you talk about the artifacts. And that's fine because, in order for you to understand the guide, you have to read it a couple times. But what matters here is that in order for me to show you or to talk about the events, I have to first talk to you about what a product backlog is and what a sprint backlog is. So essentially, product backlog is a very simple thing. It's an order list of everything that might be needed in the product, and that's a list of a single source of requirements for any changes to be made in the product. And product backlog, as I said, can be it has everything that you need to be taken care of so that you can create a product. That also might include after you start, might include bugs or issues. It all depends on how you plan to sort this. Normally we refer to just requirements. And in previous versions, Microsoft only had user stories as part of the product backlog. But now, as you'll see, product backlogs can include anything. Something that goes into the product backlog is called a product backlog item. So it's very generic. Now, the sprint backlog is on its side is a subset of the product backlog items selected for the sprint. And then it also has a plan for delivering the product increment. And when I say a plan is that you take those product backlog items and then you break them down into tasks as you move into the sprint. Well, then let me show you here what these two are, and then I can talk about the events themselves. So as you can see here, well, not on this one, on this other one, this is an example of a product backlog. See here that I have work item types of, here I have a product backlog item, and also in this product backlog I have a bug. I have bugs, I have 2 bugs actually. And those 2 are the ones that sort of allow me to find out if I want to go in the future iteration. I can have the product owner prioritize those, and if the product owner finds out that those bugs are relevant for the delivery of what we call an increment, meaning the software for the next sprint, then he or she will approve those. So normally, as we go through the sprints, there'll be a product backlog grooming meeting, right? Where you will go through the product backlog and add new items if need be. So, for instance, let's say that the product owner just realized that we need to create a new feature that was not included. Then the product owner, who's the guy who really owns the product backlog, will create a new item, and then this item will be added to the backlog and prioritized. So those are the 2 things that you have to do prior to go to what we call the sprint planning meeting. You got to have a product backlog, and it's got to be ordered by the product owner as an input. Now, product backlogs are work items. So let me show you here in detail what a work item looks like. So here you have a title, and this one has a default format like a user story. So as a type of user, I want some goal so that some reason is achieved. Now, it doesn't have to be like that, meaning that the product backlog item can be can follow any format for requirements. But normally in Agile, the best practice has been to use user stories. If you do have, for instance, a quality of service, you would just then replace this with a proper quality of service, like I have to achieve a load performance of less than 5 milliseconds for screens A, B, and C, something like that. And that would be another type of way of putting those requirements in here. So as we go into product backlogs, as we add those items in here, I can also use other views in Visual Studio to manage this throughout the meeting. So in my meeting, if I'm driving the sprint planning meeting, most likely I will start with the backlog, right? And there's another picture here. This picture is different from the previous one in a very simple way. It's just that this one allows us to do what we call forecasting. You see here on the right side, this forecasting view. Let me do this. I know that this screen is too big. Sometimes it might not be possible for you to see everything. So what I'm doing is I'm using just a subset of the screen so that it'll make sure that you guys can see everything. So as you can see here, on this right side, I have this forecast on or off. So I'm going to turn on forecast. And you'll see that it changes the way that the backlog is depicted. Now I have a few things added. First is that I have a velocity here, right? that's being shown as being 10. Also, I have, based on that velocity and the sizes of, the relative sizes of things that we added, those are not necessarily hours, but primarily, points, or each team can define its own calibration or metric. But essentially, when you have that effort measured in some way or another, then I now can allow the tool to automatically separate or put those items within the iteration. So it takes also into account the priority. So notice that, for instance, for sprint 4, I only have the capability of doing one item, right? Which is item number, this item here, which is the service rep can view service ticket details from the dashboard. This order column here is added or moved or modified as we move items up and down. So for instance, if I for some reason wanted to move this item down here, right, in the order, notice now how the backlog has been, oh, I did get an error here. TFS can update that because the server clock may have been set incorrectly. And I know what it is that I'm using a virtual machine which has been disconnected from the clock, and because of that we're having a conflict. But it doesn't matter. You see from the picture here, this is what we would like to have seen, right? As I move the item around, it pretty much reconfigures the backlog so that now sprint 4 has 2 items, 3 and 4, still within the size of 10 from my velocity, and sprint 5, which now has 8 and 3, still within the boundary. I'm giving it 1 there. And then sprint 6 would be what comes next here. And before the rendering was done, that's when we had the error. So that's fine. I'm going to discard the changes here. And go back to what we had before. Although we didn't. Oh, interesting. Yeah. It didn't refresh it, but let's see. Let's do a quick refresh. So I'll leave this page then. Okay, so this returns to what we had before. But this makes it very simple for the team to, move things around and have things moved up and create a sort of a release plan on a very dynamic basis. Now, as we proceed into the sprint, as you guys remember, I will be looking into sprint planning itself. Now, as I do the sprint planning, the next thing that I will do is I will probably use the following view, which is a view such as this, right? This is actually an example of an ongoing sprint. If I'm planning the sprint like sprint 4, I would be adding items in here based on my capacity, right? Now, notice that capacity is what the team will have on that particular sprint. A sprint has a date, a defined date, as you can see here, May 21st, June 1, 10 days. This is editable. I can modify the sprint sizes in here from start and end date. And based on that end date, I'm actually able to say, hey, if Annie is going to be out, you can pretty much say that she's going to have 0 days. Well, right now she's got 0 days. So let's say that she's on vacation. So that's what we have in here. Now, if Brian Keller is available on that week, I could say then he will have about half of his time for doing design. So that would be 4 hours a day. That would be then about 20 hours available. And so on. So this allows you to also to break down your work per activity here, as you can see on the side. Let me go back to the current sprint and show you what we have. Notice that we don't really have any particular activities assigned, but it's right now broken down by people. I have Annie, Brian, Cameron, and Julia, and they all have some hours already allocated to them, as you can see here in the capacity piece. Now, normally this assignment by activity is if you want to balance the team's activity per activity. Most Scrum teams, they leave it to the developers to define how many activities this is related to, but I'll come back to that when I talk about the delivery of an increment in just a bit, on how this might be useful in there. So as I look into the sprint, the objective then is that I'm able to, after creating or setting up my capacity for the sprint, to start adding tasks associated to one of those selected product backlog items. So for instance, on this one, technician can see service tickets on Windows Phone. Notice that I have it assigned to Brian Keller, but I will have several people working on it. Julia, Brian Keller, Cameron Skinner, and Andy also will be doing a few things in there. These tasks, right, they are all connected to that user story so that I have what we call a traceability relationship. If I, for instance, open one of those tasks, I can go to the links, and I can see that this is connected to a product backlog item. Technician can see service tickets on Windows Phone. Also, as the developers or people who are working on this particular task, in this case here you see Julia Iliana, the task was tracking when work was started and when work was finished, allowing you then to see progress from either an individual task level or at the overall level. Now this is a nice view, this view here of having the backlog, when you're moving things around, when you're breaking it down. But normally when you're going through the sprint itself, you're going to use another view. So this view is particularly used for the planning side. But normally when you're already into the sprints, this is usually the view that you're going to be using for those tasks. So see here that in these on those backlog items, I have still a few things to do in terms of tasks, a few hours of tasks to do, right? So in this case here, I have Brian Keller, Julia, and Cameron working still on a few things. Now, actually, those are still to be started, and then I have a few in progress, right? And review new feature with technician and so on, and then a few that have already been done. So this is very useful for you to, during the sprint meeting, right, when you're doing the daily scrum, or even when you're doing the planning here. In fact, this allows you to move things around if you think that something is done, right? Or there's another view here, which is Annie, Brian, Cameron, and Julia. They're going through that process, right? And on a day-to-day basis, as I'm doing the daily scrum, and I'm looking at what people are doing, the team might decide, hey, Annie has only one thing going on, and it's about it's 1 hour, and Cameron has two things to do, and he's already up doing one, which is 5, right? So you see here, Anne has this one. Cameron is working on this one. Now, so let's give this one to Anne. Now, remember that those numbers here do not necessarily mean that they are one thing is more complex than another. It might be that the one with 7 takes 7 hours, but it's simpler in terms of complexity. And the one that is being done by Cameron, we have tentatively assigned 5, but it might eventually become even bigger. And in order for us to avoid this, maybe Cameron just basically might decide, okay, well, let's do this. Let's assign this to Anne. So I can click the name here and then just on the spot choose Anne as the person that will be delivering that particular one. So if I do this, notice that then this goes to Anne's backlog, and I can then move it around. Anne can start doing that immediately. Now, this is very useful, as we said, for the sprint planning. And sometimes you might be doing this during the daily Scrum, as people say, okay, what have I done? What have I done? It's on the done side. What am I doing today? It's on the progress side, and what we need to do in the future, right? And if you have any impediments, there'll be a point where the Scrum Master might capture the impediments by pretty much creating a new impediment work item. So you see here, you can say, hey, Brian can't work on item XYZ, and I could actually go here to links and link it to an item, right? By linking it to something like, let's see here. Maybe storyboard or from the product backlog, let's find something here. Let's just create a random link over here. I think I chose the wrong query because I chose affected by, right? Or affects. It doesn't matter. So we see here that normally I would do the other way around. Actually, it depends on the team's convention for this. I have an impediment, and that impediment affects the product backlog item, as you can see here, right? So I have this impediment, and this impediment affects this item here. So you're the one that chooses the type of link, right? In this particular case here, I chose affects as the way to link this. So as I create this, now the product owner has his own backlog. Sorry, the Scrum Master has his own backlog to, on that day, take care of those impediments. Okay, so going back here, and we're about to finish this part of the demo. What else did we? Yeah, so we talked about essentially the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint. Now let's talk a little bit about the sprint review and retrospectives, right? Again, if I'm doing the sprint review, the best view would be the one that shows either the dashboard or the backlog view, right? Now, notice that in this particular one, I can either take a look, as I said, on the backlog items or the team member overview. And if I want to talk about how fast are we going, the Burndown Chart is available at all times very easily. In this case here, this team is an ideal trend to finish on the 18th, but you notice that they are a bit late in delivering. So most likely, if they start capturing this, they will probably end up finishing around here. As you can see, if I can, trace a curve from, sorry for my poor curve in here, around. So this would be the actual delivery curve. So in Scrum, the most important visual aid graphic to see, how the team is going is the Burndown Chart. There are other reports in Visual Studio, NTFS 4, managing the team project, among them the user stories, but due to timing, I'm not going to go into those right now. But essentially, you have anything that's needed for you to do the daily Scrum and the planning and the review over here in these particular views in terms of the dashboard. And that also the retrospective is the final item, which right now I'm still working on how to enable that and to capturing that into TFS. It's because in the past, sprints used to be a work item, and they had a description field where you could add some notes about the retrospective. Since we don't have that anymore into Visual Studio 2012, what I'm doing now is I will create a new task, and I will call that task retrospective and attach it to the sprint. And in that, I'll have the action items to be improved for the next iteration or sprint. Okay, so going back now to the presentation itself. We talked about the events, and now the order that we see in the Scrum Guide is now that we will be seeing then the artifacts. Of course, we have already talked about product and sprint backlogs. Let's talk a little bit about what we call the increment. The increment is what we deliver, right? So it should be, based on Agile best practices, that it should be a vertical slice of your software. What is that vertical slice? It should be that when you're planning an increment, your tasks should represent whatever is needed to be done for that subset of the backlog, which is the story, and that story should have a presentation tier element, a business tier element, or tasks, data logic. Sometimes you even go to the point of persistence and infrastructure. Of course, we leave it to the developers to define what tasks will be needed. But for instance, when you're breaking down the stories into, or the product backlog items into task details, ideally you should have tasks that represent each of those, but also testing, right? And acceptance, which leads us to the next item. I'm going to do a quick show here. Actually, no, I don't have time for that because we only have 11 minutes. But I want to show you something here, which is the guides that we have. Yes, this is the one. Microsoft has developed a very nice integration of Visual Studio architectural tools with TFS. So therefore, not only you can structure modeling solutions, you can map those solutions to tasks and things that will be done in there. And you can also validate your task as you divide it in tiers, right, or layers. You can validate those by applying the tools that Visual Studio provides, so that that also works on sort of a testing from an architectural perspective. This in itself would take me another half hour to demo, setting it up and showing you guys how this goes. So I recommend that you go through this item in Visual Studio documentation called Modeling the Application for more detail. But essentially, Visual Studio allows you to structure your application in tiers, then attach those tasks or those tiers into a slice of the architecture, so that the architect can pretty much enforce later when we get at the end of the sprint the final increment. You can validate it that it's pertaining to the rules that the architect created for the layers and so on. Now, as we move on back to our presentation, the final item that we see in the Scrum Guide and here as some of the essential items that we need to have is the definition of done. That is, done is the criteria that the product owner applies to a product backlog item, and also it includes what the team might add in terms of technical items or technical requirements to an increment. So there are several ways of enforcing this. So from the backlog owner perspective, right, what we want to achieve is that shared understanding of what we're trying to do, so that the product owner knows what's expected and the team knows what's expected from the product owner perspective. Now, this contract, if you will, right, remember that we emphasize collaboration, but there must be some understanding between the two sides, and that's why I'm calling this a contract. This helps guide the development team in knowing how can you plan what you want to do, because if the product owner, let's say, requirements are very strict, then you might have to extend that into several validation aspects, and therefore it takes more time. But if the product owner just wants something simpler, then that drives other decisions as well. Also, this will be used by the product owner, him or herself, at the end of the sprint when they do the acceptance testing, right? The user acceptance testing, while testing the working increment. The final item here is that, based on the guide, is that as the teams mature, their definition of done will expand to include more stringent criteria for higher quality. That's what we call in Visual Studio quality gates, or in Microsoft's parlance, quality gates, in that as you move on later in the cycle, you might increase the technical requirements. So, for instance, you might say that for this sprint, I don't need to run any localization tests. But as I move on to the final release, then I include the localization tests as part of my builds, right? So what does that mean in terms of Visual Studio? If I go back here and I take a look on this particular project, you'll notice that I have the capability of doing a few things. First, I can create builds, right? And I have this nightly Fabricam build. I'm going to go into this build in just a minute. Builds are working versions of the software that will be tested for both unit tests and whatever other tests you define on a particular basis, right? So this includes some criteria of done from the technical perspective. But from the user perspective, what we're talking about really is that we would like to have, let's say, one of the requirements here, such as this one, service rep. Right, it's about product backlog. See here that right in the middle of the screen we have acceptance criteria being shown. So this is where we write the done criteria from the user perspective. And that might be something as simple such as, I will know that this is done when I see tickets in the page, in the dashboard, and they contain all relevant information so that the support person can fix the issue. Sometimes those acceptance criteria might even have some details on rules or workflows, and those eventually might drive requirements. Now I'm giving you guys a very simple one. So as I save this, right? Oh, again, the same clock issue. Yeah, that's bugging me here. As I create the acceptance criteria from the product owner perspective, those might be rendered by test cases. So you have two types of validating this. So as I do the user acceptance in the review meeting, the sprint review meeting, I will be looking at the acceptance criteria on each of those product backlog items and say, hey, do we validate, is this valid? Is this what we wanted to show? Now, you can also create test cases and attach those test cases to the product backlog items so that those can be automated. The best practice is that we will get the acceptance criteria and change them into test cases and then have them be part of a list of tests that will be run with every build. Some teams do not agree on that. In my projects, I've been using that as a best practice, which is you have the acceptance criteria that will be used by product owner, and separate from that, the testers will take that as an initial feedback, connect that to the story itself, and then create the tests that will be used. So from here, for instance, I could create a new test case, right? Which would be something like, test viewing service tickets. That would be one of the subsets of what we need to be here. I'm going to have that error again because of the lock issue. Oh, not good. So as I say here, I can also edit this using Test Manager to add the steps and so on. We don't have the time to do this, but the idea then is that I can satisfy the need for creating an all-encompassing definition of done by using both the acceptance criteria tab and the test cases tab. Now, the final thing is that what I talked about builds, right? What if I have, what if my acceptance criteria also includes something such as localization tests? I could, if I have that as part of what I have in my definition of done, I could add into my builds a set of items, in this case unit tests, that will be run as part of the build. So for instance, as you can see here, I have unit tests enabled, and they're run as part of the automated build. Now, what those unit tests do is that I can establish gated requirements so that I can move on. And in fact, there is a type of build that is called gated check-in that allows me to trigger a build only after some criteria has been satisfied. This is the one. Accept check-ins only if the submitted changes merge and build successfully. Now, what that does as well is that those gated check-in requirements, they enforce what we can at the team level establish as a prerequisite or configure in the team project as a prerequisite for the criteria that we have to achieve when doing check-ins. I won't have enough time to talk about that, but essentially then I can satisfy with Visual Studio 2012 all kinds of done criteria, those from the product owner and also those that the team decides are the best to enforce technical quality of the product. So, as we've seen so far, and going back to our presentation here, Visual Studio then pretty much helps me break the barriers and allow continuous delivery of value in terms of increments as I go on with my Scrum process. So all this value, all those value cycles, they overlap one another, and eventually you'll be able to achieve your bigger releases as you sum and overlap those working software increments to achieve the final value that the customer wants. I would recommend that you guys keep this URL in mind, visualstudio.com/ALM, as a starting point for you to review and go deeper into those topics. And those will lead into, that URL leads into the documentation itself. Plus, there are several very interesting demos that you can see with Visual Studio when you start. Let me see here. In the start page, as you can see here, you have Learn More with those streaming videos. Those are very cool videos that show how to use those features of Visual Studio to enable your Agile process. With that, thank you guys very much today for being here, and I would like you guys to, if you have any questions, I'm going to stay here for another 5 minutes for any questions. And for those that are not able to continue, thank you very much for attending.
Okay. Thank you, Clementino, for this awesome presentation. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them in at this time. In the meantime, I'm going to click through a few polling questions and would greatly appreciate your feedback. So, our first question: was this content helpful for your business? Next question, please rate the presentation content. Next one, would you like us to schedule a follow-up? And last question, how did you hear about this webcast? We will be forwarding the link to view a recording of this webcast once it becomes available. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webcast. You're now free to disconnect. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you next time.